How's it going, guys? Gast here, giving you part 19 of Fire Emblem Awakening. And I did a dumb move by not recording the audio or my voice in this playthrough because I forgot to turn it on, because the last time I had it off was when I was recording stuff for the Elliowood video, in which I was only recording gameplay footage and nothing else, so I turned my audio off. And that bit me in the butt because I forgot to turn it back on. So I played this chapter and I recorded absolutely zero audio. So that's kind of stupid on my part. But I wanted to take this opportunity to just talk about what I'm thinking about Awakening right now. Like, literally nothing happened in this chapter anyway. So, like, story-wise, nothing. They just went on a boat and Robin flexed his, like, tactician muscles, which is fine, I guess. But literally nothing happens in this map story-wise. So I feel like, I guess now would be a good time to talk about Awakening and my feelings about it, because it's like in the halfway point. We're on chapter 14 now. And I think I have a few things to say about it. So there's this idea that I really don't like Awakening, or people are curious about my opinions on Awakening. And I'll tell you what, I think it starts off pretty strong, and there's a lot of elements that I'm starting to appreciate about Awakening that I never have before. I don't think it's the worst game I've ever played. I don't think it's the worst Fire Emblem I've ever played. I think it's probably the easiest, because I'm not really thinking. The only time I really thought hard, I think, was in chapter 11 when I was against Gangrel, which was really stressful. But aside from that, strategy was never really a super huge issue for this map. I think there might have been a couple others, but it's not really that difficult. And once you sort of get the pair-ups going, which you'll see in this map, and you saw before with Stahl and Cordelia, now you're going to see with Henry and Tharia, which I think I can just skip over to, because this map was just kind of like, it was pretty busy now, and then what I ended up doing was I put Cordelia and Stahl, and then I put her in the water, and then I had Tharia and Henry pair up like right here. So that's what happened there. I had Anna here to do the lock touch and stuff too. So yeah, this map was really easily mitigated by just using effective weapons and just throwing Tharia at stuff with Nosferatu. She just kind of crushed it with that. Yeah, I also made Lonku an assassin so he could use bows. And Gas is here. He's going to try to tank some of those flyers. What I didn't expect were those two flyers from the right side to come by, but whatever, he survived. So yeah. There's one thing that I kind of started appreciating with Awakening, was the grinding aspect. Now, I'm not really huge on grinding. I'm not a big fan of it. I don't really have the time to grind. I'd rather just play the chapter and get that over with. But the thing I do appreciate about Awakening's grinding is that it's really, really, really easy. The XP gains are very, very fast. And the music is nice. It's just a nice cathartic feeling when your goal is to grind, and it just does that. It just, like, the game understands that all you want to do is grind. There's no dialogue, obviously, because they're just risen chapters. There's money to be gotten. Like, you can get bouillons and stuff. Like, each risen fight, I think, gives you like 3 bouillons, which is like 3 grand, which is sick. And the feeling of just leveling up and just seeing your XP rates go by really quick is just nice. It's a nice feeling to know that you're here to grind, and the game understands that, so they make it really, really easy to. I think it's very convenient for them to do that. I think the maps and the enemy placement's fine. It's just like scattered enemies. It's not really thinking. Like, those chapters are not meant for you to think hard. They're just meant for you to just pass time and grind, just like you would grind in anything. It's not really mind-boggling, because it's grinding, and I think grinding is an understood thing where you just kind of turn your brain off and you just play, and you just get your experience and you get your gold and you get out of there. So I think it's a cathartic feeling that Awakening does really well, is letting you grind. And I think it's really helpful because grinding is always a really nice feeling, and maybe even if I don't like grinding, I can appreciate the thought they put into the grinding mechanic and the grinding aspect of this game. And I think it translates well into Revelation, and I'm assuming Birthright as well, but I like it in Awakening a lot. Story-wise, I think the first arc is a pretty solid arc. Nothing really to complain about. I think the premise of time travel at the beginning with Lucina kind of acting behind the scenes, trying to fix things, but trying to stay out of it to make sure things don't get super changed. It's a good precautionary measure to have, I suppose, for time travel. And her story of how she had to go back in time because Naga was like, oh yeah, the world's going to get boned. And her moment with Crumb is actually pretty touching, honestly. Like, it's a nice feeling. You can kind of empathize with her that, she's been bottling up her feelings for so long. She didn't even know how Crom died back then. So I can feel for her, and I feel what, like, the tension and, like, the nervousness and, like, the emotions that were rising, and it kind of culminated into her crying, which I could get along with, and I understood why she did it. It was a nice scene. It was a nice scene to watch. I'll tell you what, I do enjoy Crom as a character for this few arc, but I know he kind of gets on the back burner for a bit and doesn't really do a lot, or doesn't really develop out of having Emerin die. So that's that. I don't really have any care for many characters in this game aside from Stahl, because I just think Stahl's a cool guy. I think I can relate most to him because he seems like a pretty, like, late, not really punctual dude, kind of sleepy, kind of lazy, likes to eat, which is kind of like me. So I feel for him there. And I'll also tell you that Tharia intrigues me because I know she has this notorious reputation for being, like, this super creepy stalker and super, like, heartless and whatever. But it kind of made me curious to see what her supports are actually like, because it's those kind of contentious characters that, and me trying to find an alternative perspective, barring Perry, because I think everyone hated Perry and I just kind of doubled down on that hate, but whatever. An alternative way of thinking about characters, and maybe proposing a new idea. And I think talking about Tharia and trying to find maybe some value in her supports would be a fun activity to do. So I was thinking maybe another support science down the line would definitely be doing one on Tharia. Because I don't think she's that bad of a character that people make her out to be. I look at her character and I look at her personality, and aside from her stalkerness with Robin, I don't really have a bad first impression of her. She's kind of cold-hearted and whatnot, and she likes to curse people and shit like that, but I don't really think that's indicative of a bad character. I know she mistreated Noir, so I'll have to see what those supports are like. But the way I understand it is that Noir comes from a time where, where it isn't the same Tharia we're dealing with. Like, it's a different time. So I'm wondering if that kind of change, if these different Tharias affect themselves, because these are obviously different people. There's obviously different events going on, and that makes me curious because these are the parents now that like the kids are seeing not as their parents, but as just people who they've never met before, like the parents to the kids wise. So that'd be pretty interesting to see. Yeah, so I think Tharia has some intrigue behind her, and I think because she has this really shitty reputation from the community, I think it'd be worth checking her out and see what she's all about. I think Henry's hilarious. My friend Thane, who's helped me with support sciences, is a big fan of Henry, and I think his lines are really funny. And I know his history. He's a lot more of a crazy person in the Japanese version, and I think he got localized pretty well. And he seems to be a fan favorite because of his humor. I'm not super interested in doing a support science on him because I think I don't get the impression, and I could be wrong on this, that he doesn't have a lot of depth to him. I think he's just really well written and really funny and stuff, and I'm sure he has some sort of tragic backstory like everyone else does, but I wouldn't know if it's worth it doing a support science on Henry. I'm not super invested in him. I just kind of like him for the novelty of being this sort of crazy dude who is a dark mage and stuff like that. For Awakening characters, I think the characters that I'd like to do most of support science on would be Tharia. Maybe Noe? Probably not. Just characters who are kind of get a bad rep. I think those are the most interesting ones And I think those are ones that people would either like to go see a video on and get their feelings like reconfirmed, or get a different perspective to maybe change their mind. I know Lucina's really popular, and I've seen different sides of Lucina. There's one side that, really appreciates her writing in the sense that she came from a really bad place, and her emotions are built off the fact that she's dealt with this trauma. But there's also another side that there's this feeling that Lucina might come off like really emotional and stuff, but she's kind of like the trope. I read this really long write-up on Reddit that Lucina just is sort of this really generic, like, tragic past character that doesn't really have a lot of depth to her outside of her cliches and her tropes. I thought the read was pretty interesting. It was from a guy who just really didn't like Awakening at all, and it didn't really color my perception of Lucina at all, because I don't know who she is at all. But I want to find that article, that write-up again, because it was really interesting to read. I think it's always nice to read something that just completely really scrutinizes a character or a story in a way that actually makes you think, and isn't just like swearing over and over and over, or just not researched well at all and just kind of badmouths the character just for, the sake of it. There's also a feeling I get with Tharia and other characters who are sort of like thrown under the bus in that regard, that a lot of people just kind of like hop on the bandwagon, and their beliefs and their impressions of a character are colored by the person they watched, which I find is really unfortunate. And I'm guilty of it too. I think everyone is. It is unfortunate that happens. And that is what it is. So it's nice to, see what people's complaints are, and then actually seeing if it holds up. And then if it doesn't hold up, trying to make an alternative case for it or something like that. Now, design-wise, Awakening, I said that from a grinding aspect, it's cathartic and it's nice to grind. And I've actually never really enjoyed grinding as much in Fire Emblem as I have in Awakening, which is to its credit, because I think Awakening is all about that shit. From a map design point, I think it's interesting. And I know the first few chapters were kind of boring because they did this really annoying thing where they just kind of mirrored both sides of the map with the same enemy placement. Wasn't really thought-provoking at all, but, honestly, you can't really harp on early games for Fire Emblem aside from, like, Conquest, I guess. The early games I've played... No, I think Radiant Dawn was also a really hard early game as well. Early games don't really tend to be that complicated. Especially for Awakening, which seemed to be very welcoming to new players. You can understand what they were doing. So I can't really criticize... Like, it's not like Awakening's map design was stupid because the map guys... The people who were creating the maps were super inept. Henry almost died here. Obviously, they made boneheaded moves with ambush spawns and really bad hinting, which is their fault entirely, which was a really bonehead move. And I don't really know how they could have done that, because they have literally, 12 references to make for games and stuff. So I don't really know what they were thinking with that. But aside from that, I feel like if their goal was to make Awakening really, really accessible and not really hard, valuing, relationships and stuff, and just opening up the market for new players, I understand what they were doing, and I appreciate that. I don't think it's something that they could really do if they had a perspective for like Conquest, with really complex things that demand that you know what you're doing. With Awakening, you don't really need to know what you're doing to enjoy the game. And I think that kind of gets conflated with the map design being really bad and like the bad impressions that Awakening has. And while I would very much appreciate maps like the Gangrel maps that, while flat, are very well with that do well with terrain and enemy placement. I found that Gangrel map, aside from the ambush spawns, but they give you a sufficient hint, and it's been 11 chapters, so you should know what you're doing. And if you're playing for this for the first time, you're playing on normal, which means you kind of have a feel for it. I'm playing on hard, and I've never played it before, so going in blind hard in an Iron Man it gives a level of stress and intensity to it. But from the goals that they wanted to set out with Awakening, I think they succeeded, and I think it was necessary. Do I wish that they valued they valued less on the waifu emblem aspect? I was really battling this sentiment, because part of me wants to say, yes, I want less, waifu aspects of it. And I think, instead of depending on so much of this, maybe focus instead on, the map design aspects, because that's what a lot of people complained about, and the story building aspect. And while I do think they could have done a better job on the writing, I'm gonna have to say, I'm enjoying these supports. I've done a lot of support reading, and I'll tell you what, Awakening is quite fleshed out for supports, especially their C supports. I've learned to appreciate Faith supports for what they are, and I can find the value in those supports despite their C supports being very not that great. But the C supports in Awakening are very amicable, and some of them are very fleshed out, which I can really appreciate. Some of them are a little bit drag on for a little bit too long. But supports in Awakening, I can't really I don't think there's any supports that are like Dwessel tier, and I think the Sacred Stone supports are very concisely written and are probably the best in my opinion. And I don't think Awakening can get to that level at all. But compared to Fates, the impression that I'm getting with Awakening supports is that they're just more thought out. They're more characteristic. I know they're very tropey and one character does the same thing over and over, but I can appreciate the charm. I can appreciate the charm they're trying to put in with the writing. And I'm sure there's some serious and very somber and sobering supports that I just haven't come across yet, because I'm not really diving too deep into the supports, but I'm sure I can find some. And I don't have any complaints for the writing for the stories, for the supports. Story-wise, I know it kind of gets into a bit of a crazy sort of, they shafted and there was a bunch of missed opportunities and stuff. But yeah, support-wise, I'm enjoying the game so far, and story-wise, I think the first arc did a sufficient job. And while I know how the time travel shit plays out, I think the initial premise is good. I think it adds intrigue, and I can appreciate the subtleties that if you play it over again, then you'll notice some different things that you might have not noticed before. And I think that is to the writing's credit. For example, in the opening cutscene, you see right when after Lucina tells Crom about how he dies, Robin gets this headache thing, and then Lucina acts suspicious about it. So it's those sort of things that you might not understand the first time around, but then it kind of clicks for you. It's like, oh, that's what that writing, that's what that aspect meant for that. I think the worst part about Awakening so far, and I can't really, obviously the ambush spawns are the worst part, but I think the part that is kind of funny and bad is the animations. I can't tell you how much I'm not a fan of these animations at all. And I think it came at a point where this was the first time Awakening, or the first time Fire Emblem was on the 3DS, so I'm sure it was very new territory for them. These 3D models, the lack of feet, the RuneScape looking faces, fake and stuff. And you can obviously see the progression on how, the 3DS on Fire Emblem has developed, which I can really appreciate it. I can really appreciate that. And it actually brings me back to the GBA, because if you compare Awakening to FE6, you'll know from a graphical standpoint that FE6 was literally the worst. I thought the colors were ugly, there was no blinking frames, the animations were janky as fuck. They were so choppy, and they were the presentation was, sure, it was GBA, but it is very, very, very dated. And you compare that to Awakening, and you can also see this progression between FE6 and 13, and then 14 and 7, and then you're going to see echoes with 8. And of course, FE7 and 8 didn't really differ that much from a graphical standpoint, but it actually it did improve because the animations that they added were incredibly smooth, and the art style was more ambitious. It had a more saturated sort of garish kind of look to it, but also the angles of the characters were also much more different. I think they had different angles. The colors were, take it for what it is, but they were more concentrated and less washed out than FE7 and especially FE6. And that in itself is sort of development, engine-wise and graphic-wise and stuff like that. And that's something I can also appreciate with Awakening and how it's developed as well. So, looking back, starting with Fates and then going back to Awakening, it's just you see like the UI being so much more. It's the UI for Awakening is so bad compared to it's not bad, but it's very dated compared to what Fates did. But for the first 3DS title, it really does remind me of FE6 a lot. Because FE6 was incredibly watered down compared to FE5, and at the same time, FE13 was very watered down compared to the last big title for North America, which was, of course, FE11. But when I think things before FE13, I think of Radiant Dawn, and I just see a lot of semblances in that, and that makes me appreciate Awakening more so than I think people give it credit for. Because if you're a Japanese player and you go from FE5 to FE6, you may have felt very similarly to going from Radiant Dawn to FE13. Because, FE5 had... I never played FE5, but I know the difficulty and the notoriety behind it. And then FE6 comes in much easier, much more colorful, much friendlier, much more for kids. The designs were much more cartoonish. Gonzalez had these big feet and these big hands. You just had a lot more youthfulness in FE6. And the animations were much more sprightly and stuff. So from that aspect, I can appreciate what Awakening tried to do, and I don't really hold it against them because it ended up doing what FE6 ended up doing, and of course it ended up doing what FE7 did for us, and introducing the franchise in a really easy way. If I had to fucking play Fire Emblem for the first time and it was like FE4, my attention span could not do it. If it was FE5, I don't think I could do it either. But because it was FE7, which was so clean and fast and whatever, and appealing and colorful, and the characters, here's the thing. From a first impression standpoint, these characters are very easy to identify. And I think it works because it's not really looking to be super deep from a first impression standpoint, and I can appreciate that. And I don't think the impressions for FE6's characters or FE7's characters were that deep at first. Of course, I think FE6 did a better job at kind of having some depth at the beginning, and I think it was a lot. I think the world building and stuff like that was a lot better in FE6, and of course the map design was different. But what I'm trying to say is that I appreciate that sort of perspective, and I can appreciate Awakening and what it did when I compare it to what FE6 did, and how similar that situation was. So right now I'm about to beat Ignatius. But I think, I danced over, so then here, I ended up just using the Armor Slayer. And then I hit it, right? Come on, press A, Keegan. And then he just dual strikes here. So this is probably a big fault that I have with Awakening from a fun perspective. It's not really thought provoking. It's kind of just, hey, just dual strike and solo the entire game. But, a lot of people like that aspect of just kind of roiding out your units, making them super strong, and greening out your stats. And I don't really care about that. I think there's more to it than Fire Emblem than that. I do appreciate playing turns concisely. I could have beaten this chapter in literally one turn, but I just didn't do it. But you can easily do that. I could just imagine just rescuing a flyer with Libra and then just rounding out and just killing him. Anyways, guys, this is the point where I realized I didn't have any audio, so I just kind of skipped over this cutscene altogether. But I think the point's across. Any second now, they're steady and they're burning it up, and then I was like, oh shit, right, I didn't actually do anything. So guys, that was my my big old ramble about Awakening. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm sorry that I kind of fucked up on the recording here, but it is what it is. I think I try my best to keep you guys entertained here. So consider this like a podcast, I guess. And speaking of which, I will see you guys tomorrow. Or I guess I can actually do another. I'm planning on doing, I guess, 1 or 2 more videos today. One being a Heroes video. I have to go to the store, get an audio splitter. I'm gonna try to set up my phone to record. I'm just gonna play Heroes through my phone again, but I have a different setup this time. Hopefully one that ends up being much more productive and easier to work with. And then I'm also going to do some of that, and maybe another chapter of Awakening. I don't know. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys next time. Deuces.